Arsenal are top of the league. They are flying at the moment. They are 4 points clear. The big question on everyone's lips is, can they actually win the Premier League? So let's delve in and see what we can find. So on the board in front of me, I've got Arsenal as they've set up this season. This is their defensive situation. So back four, and then we've got a midfield three. We could call it a 4-2-3-1, but sometimes Odegaard drops in, makes it a bit more like a three. And then we've got the front three as well. But in possession, Arsenal are interesting because they are a team who are going to try and do positional play. So I'm going to draw my lines on the board. So we've got the central space here, the two half spaces either side, and then wide areas here. And the general idea, as we know, is to try and get players into these channels, because if you can do that, you're going to be spreading the opposition back for generating space to attack. Now this season we've seen Xhaka attacking in this channel a little bit more, and then behind that we will see Arsenal set up in a situation that allows them to possess the ball and actually build up the play. So what we've been seeing is a lot of the time the two fullbacks inverting around the central midfielder, the pivot player here, generates a huge overload in this area. So what you can do is you can possess the ball, you can retain possession of the ball, and then get it into these areas and to the front line here. Now Arsenal have made a number of signings this season which has made their lives easier on the pitch and improved them a lot. So let's have a look at some of those. So the first one here is Gabriel Jesus. Last season Arsenal had Alexandre Lacazette, who operated in a very horizontal manner here, dropped in to pick the ball up and then tried to get in behind. But what we've seen from Jesus is that he is a much more flexible player. He likes to drift out to the left. He's a really high technical player, so he can pick the ball up and generate chances out of nothing, and that makes Arsenal much more dangerous in the final third. Another player who's improved them is Zinchenko. Now, we've talked already about how Xhaka likes to get into this area, but Zinchenko is a former central midfielder playing as a fullback, so he can play in these wide areas. He can also come inside. He can also rotate with Xhaka as well, so if Xhaka drops out into these sorts of areas, Zinchenko can push in here. Xhaka can replace him in this sort of area as well. Gives them a lot more flexibility in terms of their build-up. Another area of flexibility in build-up comes at the back. So William Saliba came in, he pushed Ben White, who was playing here, into the fullback role. And this, again, gives a level of flexibility, I think, that Arsenal can do things that they weren't able to do before. So Ben White can come inside, he can also get forward, he's a good ball carrier. And again, it just gives them different ways of being able to solve these build-up situations in the deeper build-up areas. Ben White can also drop out. So let's say the opposition have two strikers in their forward press. You might not want to have your two strikers going up against your two centre-backs. So in those situations, sometimes Ben White will drop. Now Arsenal have 3 against 2 there. So again, more flexibility allows Arsenal to do build-up stuff. And then with Saliba, the other benefit you get is he is a really mobile defender. And when you're playing in this sort of way, you're leaving a huge amount of space here to be attacked. Saliba is really good at what I like to call backwards defending. So anytime the ball's going in behind and Saliba is chasing with an opposition player, he's really good in those moments. One final person we should talk about is Aaron Ramsdale, the goalkeeper, and he's probably the best goalkeeper that Arsenal have had in terms of what he can do on the ball. And again, that just gives more flexibility to Arsenal to be able to do the sorts of things that they are wanting to do in possession of the ball. And so this is Arsenal. They're much more dangerous in possession. And the big question is, has that made them more dangerous in terms of the underlying numbers? So let's take a look at that. So in the board in front of me, we've just got the underlying numbers for all the teams in the Premier League this season. And what we're looking at is expected goal difference. So that's the difference between the amount of expected goals you're generating and the amount of expected goals that you're conceding. As we can see, Man City are at the top of the table. Man City are the best team in the league right now. But when we drop down just one position to Arsenal, we can see that they have an expected goal difference per 90 minutes of around 1. Now what that means is that in most games you would expect Arsenal to put up 1 expected goal more than their opponents, which means that you would expect Arsenal to win most of their games 1-0. So Arsenal are doing very well in terms of the underlying numbers this season. But it's not just that they're doing well this season, they're doing better than they were last season. So on the board in front of me here, I've just got a graph which shows you the amount of points they've picked up over the course of their first 10 fixtures this season, and we've compared them to those same fixtures last season. Now there are a couple of teams who were promoted, and we've taken comparable teams, so the teams who went down in the same position that these teams were promoted. So there is a little bit of leeway there, but let's just work through this graph. So as you can see, this season, the red line, Arsenal have only dropped points once. That was a loss to Manchester United this season. So no points in this fixture, but the rest of the time they picked up all the available points. Now, if we compare that to last season, we can see that Arsenal are winning games that they were losing last season. So a loss to Crystal Palace away from home, Fulham here was a win this season, but against Burnley last season, Arsenal drew. So points dropped there. Points dropped against Manchester United, the same as this season, but points dropped to Brentford last season as well, away from home. And again, lost to Liverpool last season too. So as you can see in terms of the points totals, comparing the season fixtures so far with the season fixtures last season, there's a massive points gap. So Arsenal are doing much better in terms of the points. But we don't just care about points and results, we care about the underlying numbers. So let's take a look at those same fixtures compared in terms of the underlying numbers. So we've got the first 10 fixtures from the 22-23 season on this bottom line here, and then the comparable fixtures, the numbers from them above it. And as you can see, Arsenal are doing better pretty much everywhere. More goals for, fewer goals against. That gives you a much nicer goal difference there. So +14 this season compared to +2 from the comparative fixtures last season. Again, we don't just care about the raw goal data, we care about the underlying numbers as well, because that gives you a much better sense of how good Arsenal actually are. Expected goals, they're doing better. Expected goals against, they're also doing better. And as a result of that, if you look at the expected goals difference for those fixtures last season compared to this season, you can see Arsenal are pretty much running about double what they were doing last season. So Arsenal are performing better this season. So let's just dig into those underlying numbers to see why Arsenal are doing any better. And I want to divide our time into two. So let's look at the attacking play and then the defensive play in particular. In terms of the attacking play, the reason why Arsenal are better, I want to argue, is that they are generating more chances and they are generating better chances. So on the board in front of me, a lovely viz from Mark Carey, where he is looking at the percentages of possessions that Arsenal have that then turn into shots at the end. So obviously the more the percentage, the more chances you're generating when you have possession of the ball. This is through all of Arteta's time, so you can see when Arteta comes in, Arsenal are around 30% of their possessions leading to shots. But gradually through his time, that number increases so that now we're seeing Arsenal around 40% of their possessions ending up in a shot. So they're generating more chances than they usually would. But it's not just more chances, it's better chances. So again, we've got shot placements here, so all open play chances here from last season and then this season. And again, just notice the differences. Arsenal generating most of their chances from this central space here, and that's the same this season, but actually slightly less this season because there are more chances generated in more dangerous areas. So this area in front of the goal, you can see there's an uptick from 10% up to 12. And then again, we can see just different areas as well. So 13% here compared to 9 here. Now, we've already talked about how Gabriel Jesus likes to drift to the left-hand side, and that is translating into better chances in these sorts of areas. And then just another thing to notice, Ødegaard and Saka able to get the ball in the right half space and generating a lot of chances here. So Arsenal are generating more and better chances, and that's partly why they are better, because it's not just better to generate more chances and better chances, you also want to try and stop the opposition from doing the same thing. And this is an area where Arsenal have really improved. They've really improved in terms of being able to control the opposition and stop them from getting chances. And this control shows up really interestingly when you look at the times when Arsenal are scoring and when they're conceding, because there's a really interesting stat this season, which is in all competitions, when Arsenal are playing, in the first 30 minutes, they don't concede any goals and they have scored 10 goals themselves. So they're going into games on a favourable game state, as we say. That means that they are going into games early on scoring and then being able to control the opposition, stop them from scoring, and it means that there's less need for them to actually go out and try and score goals. So again, another graphic from Mark Carey that shows this really nicely in terms of the underlying numbers. So you can see here the amount of expected goals generated by Arsenal in the blue and the amount of expected goals conceded by Arsenal in the red. And you can see they're divided in terms of 15-minute groups. So that first 30 minutes there, you can see Arsenal picking up around 5.4 expected goals and they're only conceding around 1.9. Now, obviously they've been lucky to an extent to have scored so many and conceded so few, but this just shows all the way across the board that Arsenal are pretty much controlling games. They're able to generate more expected goals than they are conceding against. And this runs all the way through actually the first 60 minutes. So Arsenal are putting up more expected goals than they're conceding up till the 60th minute. There is a little bit of an interesting phenomenon here where they are actually out of whack, but then they return to that in the final 15 minutes as well. But largely Arsenal are able to control games early, and as a result, they're able to keep teams quiet. And that brings us to the defensive side, because it's not just about generating chances, it's about not conceding chances. As we've already said, Arsenal are a high possession team, so they're going to try and hold the ball as long as possible. They're going to try and get their players into this line of 5 and then have this narrow configuration here. But that makes them quite vulnerable to counterattacks, because there are all these areas here where oppositions, if they win the ball back from Arsenal, let's say their ball is turned over here, you can look for these out balls here to attacking players here. And obviously we've already talked about the benefit you get from players like Saliba being able to defend those moments, but actually the best way of defending these moments is by stopping them at source. So if the ball is turned over in the final third, you'll see Arsenal players falling on that ball in what we call a counter press, pressing to stop the opponent being able to play these balls out into dangerous areas. If you can stop those at source, then you're going to do a really good job of defending and preventing these dangerous counterattacks. And the way that you do that best is by limiting space. So again, what you're wanting to see from Arsenal then in these attacking moments when they have the ball is compression. So pushing their centre backs really high up the pitch and having this sort of area which is being very carefully guarded by your narrow players as well. And if you do that, then you make this half of the pitch much smaller, you make your task of counter-pressing much easier. And this shows up quite nicely in the data as well. So on the board here, I've got another viz from Mark Carey where he shows the defensive line height for Arsenal across Arteta's time at the club. So back in 2019-20, the average line was around 34.5 metres and it slowly pushed forward. There's been a little bit of a regression last season in terms of the average line height, but you can see here 38.2, that's the highest the defensive line has ever been under Arteta. What that does is that compresses the pitch and it makes it much easier to counter press. So that's one reason why Arsenal are better at controlling. And this again shows up really nicely in the numbers. So we've got a 10-game rolling average for high regains. Now, high regains are just when a team wins the ball back in the final third of the pitch. So as you can see, under Arteta, starts low, gets high. That's the general principle. So now up here, Arsenal around 5 high regains in a game every season. So being able to compress space and counter press really well just makes Arsenal that much better. So Arsenal are better attacking, they're better defending. The big question is, can they win the Premier League? Now, I've already said that Manchester City are the best team in the Premier League. Don't worry, Arsenal fans, that is not the end of the world, because the second best team can win the Premier League. So I want to go back quickly just to 2019-20. That was the season when Liverpool won the Premier League. They got 99 points to Man City's 81 points. And if we look at pretty much all of the underlying metrics, Manchester City were the better team. So goals for, slightly worse on goals against, but expected goals, much more expected goals for City rather than Liverpool, and fewer expected goals against. Now, it's not just the underlying numbers that matter, we can also use other metrics to try and find out how lucky a team have been. One of those metrics is expected points. Now, with expected points, what you do is you take the underlying metrics, so the expected goals for and against for a game, you feed them through a really complicated algorithm, and then you run thousands of simulations on those numbers, and it pops out a figure at the end which says, if you played this game a certain number of times, you would expect this team to get this amount of points. So we call those expected points. It gives us a much better sense of how many points you might expect to pick up from your performances. I've got the numbers here. So in the 1920 season, Liverpool picked up around 74.28 expected points. If we compare that to the 99 points that they got, Liverpool actually overperformed by about 24.7 expected points. Now, regardless of what you think of expected points models, that's a massive overperformance. So it does seem as though Liverpool did ride their luck a little bit. And then if you look at Man City as well, we can see they were a little bit under their points limits too. So Liverpool got a little bit lucky that season. Man City were the better team, but Liverpool rode through and won the league. So let's compare that with this season to see what Arsenal are doing. So this is for the first 10 games for both teams. And again, City just the better team. So more goals for, the same amount of goals against. Expected goals, City are better. Expected goals against, City are better. The points, obviously Arsenal are better, but if we look at those expected points numbers, we can see that Arsenal are around 6.45 expected points higher than where you might think they would be, and City are a little bit lower. So second best teams can win the league with a bit of luck, but the big question is, where are those areas of luck where it might go wrong for Arsenal? I've got one that I just want to point to you quickly. I've got one final graph from Mark Carey, which shows you the teams with the most unchanged lineup since August 2021. So these are the teams who've been able to put out the most settled starting 11s. And interestingly, Arsenal are right at the top of that list with 11. So Arsenal are the team who've been able to put out their best 11 the most amount of times. And what that suggests is that a lot of the performances that we're seeing from Arsenal right now are due to the fact that they can put out their best 11. So one area of luck which might play against Arsenal could be if they have an injury crisis, they lose their first 11 players and then they're falling into their depth players, and that could cause problems. So can Arsenal win the Premier League this season? Well, Arsenal are really good this season at both ends of the pitch. They're performing at a level that actually has seen teams win the Premier League before. So with a little bit of luck, Arsenal could do it.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic brings you the best sports journalism in the world in a personalised experience, connecting you with the stories and teams that you care about the most. There's coverage of 13 sports, plus direct access to world-class journalists through live Q&As, discussions and podcasts. And you can try it now for free for 30 days by clicking the link in the description.